and everything else that you need to turn in throughout the quarter. So if you look, here's like all the extra stuff if you're ever curious like what teachers see when they look at Blackboard Learn. We have like extra options for things, but this is the stuff that's relevant to you guys, and you'll see. So this little tab, it links you to the syllabus. I kind of just link everything to Google Docs since I teach 3 sections. If I need to update something, I can do it once and just have it update everywhere, so it's just kind of convenient. But again, so links to syllabus. I also have a sort of class-specific folder, which is just all of the assignments, syllabus again, some examples of previous student work, which we'll take a look at a little bit later in the class, as well as like old presentations and stuff from previous teachers who have taught this in case you want to poke through them. They also have some good information in them, and I base a lot of my sort of whatever I go over per week off of these PowerPoints. Let's see, there's also links to just like miscellaneous info, which is pretty much if you click into this, it's like all of the classes that I've taught if you want to reference the material from those. There's also links to like free and other resources, like if you're at home, you don't want to use Adobe Premiere, you don't have it, there's like free alternatives, that kind of thing, and just a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff. There's also, for those of you that haven't had me, I usually try to record the class lectures in case you want to go back and reference them. So I usually purge them to this YouTube here. So you can go back and again reference those, assuming that there's no weird technical issues and everything actually records properly. And just another link directly to previous student examples of work. So that's pretty much Learn. I have your assignments laid out all here. I group them into folders just sort of based on what you're submitting, so like stuff for the final, stuff for the robot build that you guys will be doing. That's all kind of just lumped together. So hopefully that's reasonably easy to find. There's also, in case you guys have been hearing rumors or what have you, the final is a group project. So I do have this little group tab where you can come in and sign up for whatever group you want. Apparently somebody's already signed up for a cat jester group. You will notice that there is these are all 2-people groups. They're set up to be 2 people, except for this one, which is set up to be a 3-person group. I think because there's an odd number of people in the class. Normally I say if you want to get in that group, do it. If you want to like claim that 3-person group, do it early. It seems like somebody's already done that. But yeah. So if you guys have any issues signing up with the groups, this is my first time playing with them in Learn, let me know and I'll try to fix that. But they seem to be working fairly well so far. So that's pretty much all the stuff on Learn. So again, just really quick, running through the syllabus. Hello, my name is Allison. You can find my email here if it doesn't already pop up in your Drexel email contacts. And my office hours are usually on like Monday from around 12 to 3. At some point in there, I'm probably going to end up eating lunch or going to get lunch. But I'll be in that there's like a little office next to Daphne's office. And I think the number of the room is like 220B or 230B. But it's in the same little building where Daphne is. Apart from that, let's see. So course overview and objectives. Again, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but sort of different from the previous courses you've taken, instead of having a bunch of semi-unrelated weekly assignments, pretty much all of the assignments for this course are geared to doing just the final. So there is like one sort of like spin-off assignment to like test your rig out, but apart from that, it really is just your final and the stuff that you're doing to make your final happen. And it's basically just building on the previous stuff that you've worked on, your modeling. You'll be learning a little bit of like intermediate rigging, that kind of stuff, and doing more character animation if you've not done that previously. I know technically this is supposed to be the first time you worked with a character, but I know a lot of people in Anim 2 do stuff like little humanoid plushies and stuff, so some of you may kind of have already played with that a little bit before. Anywho, apart from that, I don't know, I still highly recommend some kind of external storage device, be that the OneDrive that apparently has like 10 gigabytes or 10 terabytes of space now, which is nuts. And feel free to take notes however you want. Pen and paper, computer, doesn't really matter to me. If you want to, like I said, I record the lectures. If you want to record the lectures yourselves, you're welcome to do that, should you so choose. Linked to the Drive folder again with all of the assignment info. But basically, I'm setting up the same thing I did last quarter for those of you that had me last quarter. But basically, I'm just setting up so the number of points an assignment is worth is the percentage of your grade. So basically, if it's like an 8-point assignment, it's 8% of your final grade. All of the assignment points should add up to 90 points. and then 10% of your grade, or 10 points, is attendance. So hopefully, I just did that because it seems like it makes it really easy to calculate your grade. Like there's no ambiguity of like what like weird formulas that sort of are mysterious and you can't calculate till the end. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions about that? Sweet. All right. So just like, again, in the event that I cancel an assignment for some reason, I'm just going to do all of the assignment points. I'm just going to calculate that and do 90% of the grade and then leave attendance as 10%. So late assignments, for every 24 hours an assignment is late, it's going to be a 10-point reduction in the grade. And after 1 week, the assignment will no longer be graded. So technically, if your assignment is like 1 minute late, it's supposed to be a 10-point reduction. I'm a little like loose with that, especially because I have the deadline of assignments set right before class, so it should be due 9:30 on Tuesday mornings. If you guys notice that an assignment deadline is not set to that and it's something like unexpected, please do let me know. Every once in a while I do miss an assignment when I'm going back and like re-putting in the deadlines for stuff, so I can just tweak that and it'll fix whatever issues. But yeah. So apart from that, the only other sort of thing that I want to note about late assignments is sort of work in progress assignments, usually for the final. So if you're doing something like rough animation and that's due the week before the final, and you don't submit it until like the day of the final when you submit your final, and it's like the exact same content as the final, I am also not going to grade that. The reason being is that work in progress assignments are sort of there for two reasons. One, to keep you on some kind of hopefully reasonable schedule, and two, so that when we can look at them in class and you can get feedback before submitting the final assignment. And if you're just submitting the same thing as the final on the day of the final, it kind of defeats both of those purposes, which is why those will not be graded. Does that make sense? Excellent. All right, so resubmits, I do allow them, pretty much I think for everything in this class. They are due 1 week after the original assignment is due, and this time I may or may not change this, but I was like, oh, late assignments won't be eligible for resubmits. I'm like, maybe I'll allow that. We'll see. But either way, so I'll come back to this a little bit later, but I have some weird sort of like loose open-ended assignments, which is just sort of like submit whatever you've been working on that week. And I'm playing with a lot of the deadlines so that you can make your scheduling a little bit more self-directed in terms of like when you want to work on stuff. So if you do want to submit stuff early, you are more than welcome to do that. I will grade it early. And then you can pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, continue just doing resubmits until the assignment is due. So conceivably, if you wanted to submit something that's due like week 11 and week 5, you have then 5 weeks to continue refining it and improving the work and your grade. Again, I'll come back to that a little bit later. I have like a schedule of assignments sort of at the bottom of the syllabus. Anywho, so any points deducted from the original submission for stuff like lateness, if you didn't submit part of the assignment, you lost points for that, that kind of thing, will not be added back in the resubmit. So please, again, do make sure that you're paying attention to what you're submitting the first time around. And the reason I do that is just to sort of enforce, like if you're working for a company or something like that, they want things in a specific format or like submitted, they need like all the stuff submitted at once. They don't want to have to come back and like chase you and be like, hey, you need to fix this. So that's why I'm doing that. In terms of how to do a resubmit, just submit over the original assignment and learn. And just make a note that it's a resubmit, and also include, if you can, a change log of the things that you worked on since you have done the resubmit, or like since the original submission. And if you don't do that, again, I'm not going to grade the resubmit. And the reason I ask for that, in case you're curious, is just, one, it makes my life easier. I'm teaching like 40 plus people, I think. I don't necessarily remember exactly what you guys have worked on. It also allows me to go back and look at specific things to ensure that I see everything you worked on and give you the maximum number of points possible for your resubmissions. And just, if you could, just resubmit all parts of the assignment, even if you haven't changed them. It just kind of keeps things organized on my end. Any questions so far? Words. All right. So extra credit, I am offering it a little bit different format. It's graded the same way as I have done previously if you've had me before. But I'm not doing sort of standalone assignments. It'll be sort of add-on, like if you want to do extra fancy things with your rig, You can earn some extra points for that for the rigging assignment. If you finish everything and you're in a good position with your final, want to add some audio, you can get like extra credit stuff for that. But basically, those extra points, like you'll never lose points for doing extra credit because that's mean. But any points you get will just be added on to the total points for your grade. So theoretically, you could get, you know, above 100% for the class. It still counts as an A+, but I guess you'd get like bragging rights for that. I don't know. You can do these pretty much whenever you want throughout the quarter. I usually like leave them open until like the day before grades close, which is usually a week after finals. And you're welcome, if I have like extra credit assignments or anything like that, or wait, what am I saying? Sorry. You're welcome to do resubmits on extra credit as well. Sorry. I get a little deja vu when this is like the third time I've run through the syllabus with everyone, and I'm like, oh god, what am I saying at this point? All right, so this is the sort of weird new thing that I'm doing. I'm trying it out, these sort of work in progress assignments. So instead of me having like specific things, there are still hard deadlines for some assignments, just to be clear about that. But some things like texturing your robot, that's not, like, not having a textured robot isn't going to prevent you from animating it. So like things like that, I'm kind of having them do significantly later in the quarter rather than be like, they must be done by week 4. Just so that if you guys, you know, want to play around with like different timelines of how you want to work on stuff, different orders of doing things, you can do that. But I have these little work in progress assignments. Like sometimes there'll be no like specific thing due. Still have one of these little dudes, and it's pretty much just submit whatever you've been working on that week instead of like a specific, you know, thing that I'm having you do. So it might be, you know, you could work on your robot texturing, or you could be doing animation, and depending on what you're working on, you just like submit whatever makes sense for that week for you. So hopefully that makes sense. I do have little documents on like specific stuff that I want, like if you're doing, you know, if you've been working on animation, like you're going to submit a play blast, that kind of thing. I'll go over those like more specifically once the assignments are actually due. And I'll go over these a little bit when we get to the sort of schedule that I have at the end of the syllabus again. But basically it's just sort of like a little bit more freeform than previous things. There are, I believe, 5 weeks this quarter where there's like a little work in progress assignment due. And basically what I'm going to do is drop the lowest 2 scores from those work in progress assignments. So you could do this, you could kind of like approach this 2 different ways. The way that I would suggest in the quote-unquote responsible way is to submit all of the work in progress assignments, and if, you know, maybe one of them you didn't get a grade that you were happy with or is like a little bit lower, if you do an extra assignment, like that lower grade will get dropped in favor of the higher one. The other thing that you can do is conceivably, if these assignments line up with other weeks where you're really busy with other classes, like I know y'all have midterms and other things to do, conceivably you could just be like, I'm going to take a week and just not do animation stuff, and that grade will be dropped. Again, that's, I don't know. Yeah, so you could approach that 2 different ways depending on how busy you are. The only other sort of weird thing about these is since these are sort of work in progress assignments, it's supposed to be just like show us whatever you've been working on. The final due date for late assignments, instead of being due a week after the assignment was assigned, it's due 3 days after class. Again, just sort of the same rationales, like they're supposed to be what you've been working on that week. And if you haven't been working on it that week, like, unless you've done that all of the work in progress weeks, like that should be fine. If like the grade will be dropped if it's, you know, as long as you've done other grades, you should be fine for like the work in progress. Kind of a rambling description, but does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so attendance, here is how I will be grading attendance. There is 1 excused absence per quarter. So, you know, if you're sick or anything like that, if there's any like crazy stuff that happens, you know, like family emergencies, you for some reason end up in the hospital, you're hit by a bus, etc., please do let me know. I will not make you come to class if you have been hit by a bus, or like, I'm thinking now of that one scene in Harry Potter where McGonagall's like, if you die, you need not hand your homework in. But anywho. Drexel policy, 3 or more unexcused absences will result in an automatic failure from the class. And I'm also going to count arriving more than an hour late as being absent because that is like extremely late. And just like a weird note, please do let me know if you come in late. Usually if I'm doing demos, I'm facing the computer and like actually don't notice people coming in. So if you want to make sure that I get you for attendance, just like let me know, just ping me. But yeah. Note taking, take notes or look at class lectures, do whatever makes sense for you. Critiques. This will be, especially sort of in the beginning of the class, a pretty critique-heavy class. Just remember with critiques, like the whole purpose of it is so that everyone benefits. It's not to like put anyone's work down or anything like that. And it's actually beneficial to both parties, like the person who made whatever's being critiqued and the people doing critiques. So I know for me, like I get really, like if I look at something for like 5 hours at a time or something, I can't see like anything wrong with it at that point. Like I just sort of go numb to it. So having fresh eyes on a project can be really, really helpful. And also for those of you that are actually doing critiques, it gives you a chance to sort of work on your problem-solving skills in terms of other people's projects, maybe come up with ideas that you might want to use for the future, and just in general, just sort of like help people all around. You guys can have dialogues if everyone is like looking at something, they're like, I totally don't understand what you were going for. Critiques are a really good chance to sort of work out and get other ideas of like what might work, and just sort of like work out weird kinks in projects that way. Let's see, grading policy. I'm not really going to go through this. Here's all the numerical grades, like whatever your final grade is, translated into a letter grade. Letter grades are what are entered into the system at the end of the quarter. And then just like a really rough breakdown of like something or like around like an A, more or less like what qualifies as like A work versus B work versus C work, etc. Let's see here. Course calendar if you need it. I'll let you know if there's any holidays that would mandate us missing class. I don't think that's a thing for you guys this quarter. But there's also the dates of like when you can add and drop courses and withdraw and all that stuff is also listed here. Excuse me. Plagiarism. Don't do it. I assume you all know what plagiarism is by this point. Yes. And then other links to like students with disabilities, and then course add drop policy, course withdraw, etc., all listed there. And then this, which I may or might not have accidentally deleted by accident, is basically just supposed to say like any of the stuff in the syllabus could be changed by your teacher at their discretion. If I make weird changes to the syllabus throughout the quarter, I usually don't do that, but I'll let you guys know, usually through a little announcement through Learn. All right. Any questions on any of that stuff? Huzzah. Cool. All right, so this is the schedule for when assignments are due, not assigned. So if it says like week 2, it is due week 2. It's not being assigned week 2 for week 3. Basically, I just sort of like color-coded stuff. I don't know why I like color coding. But the green stuff is like stuff we'll definitely be looking at in class. And anything that's like bolded is a major, sort of like major assignment with a specific deadline, not like a little work in progress assignment. So you can kind of see, I did do a thing where I broke it down into like week 1.5, so like who you're working with for the final. That's actually due this Friday. It's like a super simple, like just type the name of the people you're working with into Learn and submit it, basically. But it also shows you the points possible for each assignment and how that is graded. So like individual assignment, story pitches are going to be a group project because it's a group project for your final, that kind of thing. I'll try to keep this up to date. It should be good to go right now, except for the robot orthos should be not in week 2. But hopefully this is helpful. If you're ever wondering like what an assignment is or like when things will be due, you can always look at this to figure things out. So you will notice, I think starting week 3, I have these weird little work in progress assignments. And that is basically, again, just sort of whatever you've been working on, just bring that in, and we can take a look at that, show the class, get some feedback on it as you work. You'll notice that there are more, so like the first part of the quarter is pretty heavy on like actual sort of assignments with like specific deadlines, so like robot model and UVs, I need your rig done by week 5, that kind of thing. But towards the end of the quarter, it gets a little bit loosey-goosey, and there's a lot of sort of work in progress assignments. And this is the kind of thing where it's like, again, you know, robot texturing, you could work on your room models, just kind of like whatever makes sense for you and your group. work on that, bring it in, and we can take a look at that. So that's kind of like how those will be structured. They're each worth 4 points, and for the work in progresses, I'm kind of going to grade them on basically like how much stuff you've done and like the quality of whatever you've done. So if it looks like you've just done like 5 minutes of like really sketchy animations just to have something to submit, like obviously that'll get a lower grade than, you know, doing some like really, really nice blocking in of like a few different scenes. Does that make sense? Cool. So you will notice, again, for the finals week, there's like stuff for the final, obviously, like, I'm grading the final as like a combination of individual work and group work. I'll get to that a little bit later. But there's also all of this sort of other stuff. So like, again, robot texturing, your room models, your room textures. Technically, that doesn't need to be done until the final. But this is the kind of stuff where if you do want to submit it early and do sort of resubmits or like get grades for it earlier, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, do week 11 with your final. You're just going to need to make a lot of submissions week 11, which is totally fine. Since I am doing this sort of like loosey-goosey thing with the scheduling, I did make this sort of suggested schedule in case you guys prefer like more rigid, specific tasks for each week. So this is something you could follow if you were like looking for how I might try to approach doing this in terms of like time management and that kind of thing. So I go and I have like a lot more sort of stuff in there for like the later weeks when it's just like work in progress things. And it's mostly just sort of doing things, like trying to break up the work. I find it hard to do animation for like a week straight. Like I kind of like doing animation, take a break, work on modeling, take a break, work on texturing, that kind of thing. But it does include stuff like, obviously if your rig is broken, that is probably something that should be addressed before you get really, really far into animating. That kind of stuff. And then I do recommend in general blocking out, especially since this is like a team project, if you guys go through and block out any major pieces of geometry that you need, you know, dimensions of the room, that kind of thing that your character will have to interact with. And I'm talking like just really rough blocking out, like if you have a bed, make it a cube of the appropriate height. That way you can animate on that cube, and when you have a real bed, you can just sub it in and the animation will transfer really, really nicely onto that bed. So that's something I would definitely recommend doing early. But it's not like hardcore modeling for the room, if that makes sense. So that is pretty much the syllabus. Are there any questions on that before I go more specifically into like what the final is? Yep.
You said like on there we're not supposed to submit like a zip folder. Do we just like submit each assignment at once?
So I have, there are documents for the specific assignments. If I want a zip folder, I will specifically say like zip all your stuff. Otherwise, you're welcome to just submit individual files into Blackboard.
Okay.
Sweet. I usually, like, yeah. Yeah, usually I only ask for zip folders if there's, like, a lot of stuff. It is a lot of times easier to just sort of look at, like, individual files without having to unzip things. All right, any other questions on the syllabus? Yep.
Yeah, actually, so, because this is a group project,
yes.
Will you tell us how we should differentiate, like what's the stuff that we did versus the stuff that the group people
yeah.
did? What's a good plan? I'm probably sure we might go over this later, but like what would be the way to go about that?
Gotcha. Yeah, so I do have more information on that on the specific assignments, but basically what I'm going to do, so a lot of the pre-production stuff, so like story, storyboards, cutting your reference together, that's all just going to be graded as like a group assignment because presumably you'd be doing that together. What I'll be grading individually is the demo reel, because that's just like sort of random individual things. And I'm actually grading the animation individually. So room models, room textures, all that kind of stuff is going to be sort of like a lump team grade, as well as the overall feel of the final. So there's a, this final indie assignment. Ooh, that's cool. But this final indie assignment is basically, you're going to submit all of the animation that you did, so not the whole, like, you know, 45-second thing or whatever, just the chunks of animation you did, and I'll look at those and grade the animation individually. But the final group assignment is submit all of the animation, like the whole little 45-second short, whatever it is, and I'll be looking at that for Like, does it feel overall polished? Does it seem like the robots sort of work well together and interact with each other? How does the final story end up showing up and like being translated? That kind of thing. Does that make sense? Cool. I also do have this sort of work in progress animation that's due week 8. I just want to make sure that you guys are actually working on the animation. And that'll also be graded individually. So a lot of times I'll ask for sort of two things, like the whole thing cut together just so everyone has context about what's happening, as well as like your little individual animation bits, just like chop those together and submit those as well. Any other questions about that or anything else? Cool. All right. All right, so I'm just gonna give you guys a quick rundown of what the final is, a little bit of information about, I'll go over like the assignments that are due next week, and then we'll take a short break, and then I'll just go over like a really quick demo of like sort of different types of joints for robots, quick and easy ways to model them, so that you guys can be thinking about this kind of stuff for when you're coming up with ideas. I'll also show you guys my final if you're interested. It was very different requirements from what you guys have, and go over some past student work as well. All right, basically, if you guys, I assume that like most everyone knows, I had a lot of people asking me about it last quarter, which was like interesting to me, because when I was at school, I'm like, I don't know what this class is gonna be when I'm going into it. I'm just gonna go in and find out. But anywho, this is like robot theater. So basically, the premise is create original robots for an original story, short, or animation. And this is a group project, like I mentioned before. I've set up groups in Learn. So there should be 2 to 3 people per group. If for some reason, like, you guys are, working and someone ends up, withdrawing from the course or something like that, let me know. I'll, help you. I can probably either find another group if they want to sort of adopt an extra person, or work with you to make some kind of modifications to the story so like an individual project would work. Yep.
Where do we find like the groups on
Learn? Yeah, so if you guys are on Learn, there's like a little tab for some reason on the corner that sometimes disappears. So if you like mouse over the middle of the page, it'll bring you this little arrow. If you click that, you should be able to go under group stuff and find it. It took me like 5 minutes to realize that there was a drop down there the first time that disappeared, and it was very annoying. But yeah. Any other questions so far? All right. So the basic sort of requirements of this is, if it's an individual project for some reason, 30-second minimum. For every additional person, add 15 seconds. So if it's a 2-person group, 45 seconds, 3-person group, 60-second minimum. Other sort of requirement is no dialogue, so you can't do like subtitles or like little text bubbles. And I will add the addendum because I just watched Wreck-It Ralph. If you guys have seen that and you've seen how Q*bert talks, where he has like a little text bubble, but it's just sort of like a bunch of random little symbols or something like that. As long as it's not actual text or words and you want to like do something kind of quirky and weird like that, I'd be open to that. Just be aware that your animation, if for some reason you aren't able to get that in, should still be obvious what's happening without that extra little text bubble. It is a group project, but each person is responsible for modeling, texturing, and rigging one humanoid robot. So if you have 2 people in your group, your story should accommodate 2 separate robots in some way, shape, or form. 3 people, you need 3 robots in your project. And if for some reason someone like doesn't get a chance to do their model, or like they can't get their rig working properly in a way that would be workable to animate, there is a provided rig that you can use. It is called Skelebot, and it's honestly really creepy. So I do recommend, like, it's totally not an easy out for like doing rigs, but it is there again in case for some reason you're like really unable to get stuff working. I'll show you Skelebot a little bit later in the class as well. His face is the stuff of nightmares. And I'll probably mention this a few times. So the required robots are like 1 humanoid robot. If you want to chuck in extra robots, I won't stop you. Just watch out for scope creep. I'll kind of leave it up to your discretion, like what you guys feel comfortable with. The thing that I usually recommend is if you're gonna do an extra robot, start working on it early, make sure it's finished early enough so you're not like worrying about it week 9, that kind of thing. Or you could take the route of making it non-essential to the story. So like it's cute if it's there, but if it's not there, it's not going to be, you know, some crushing blow to your story that makes it totally incomprehensible. So that's pretty much that. In terms of how to actually divide up the work, what I usually recommend is just chopping it up per scene or per camera angle. So like there should be presumably camera cuts in your scene unless you're doing something like stylistically different, I guess. And you would basically just break it up so that everyone's doing roughly half the animation in terms of like timing. So if it's like a 45-second clip, everyone should be doing roughly like 20 to 25 seconds of animation. It doesn't need to be totally exact. But the other thing I'll be looking for, and this is something that I'll address like once you guys do your storyboards and your reference, is dividing up the animation burden, as I call it. It's not a technical term, but basically make sure that everyone's doing kind of similar like effort for the animation they're doing. So like if someone's doing, you know, 30 seconds of like hardcore running or like a fight scene with lots of action, that's obviously more labor intensive than 30 seconds of like a dude sitting on a couch eating chips. So you would want to kind of share that animation. So maybe like, you know, half the fight scene is done by person A, the other half is person B. So then you kind of like distribute that equally as well, so that person A isn't stuck with, you know, way more animation in terms of like complexity. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so story requirements: 2 humanoid robots with obvious motivation. It should be obvious sort of what they are. This changes to 3 if you're in a 3-person group. And there's always the sort of, if you can't think of a story, you can always go back to the sort of generic, like, we need power. We either need to find power, or we're gonna like fight over this one power source and see who dies at the end. You could put a weird spin on that and say, there's one power source, but nobody dies. We've welded ourselves together and are sharing a power source, or something like really strange. But that's just sort of a good fallback if you need like an extra story plot, that kind of thing. Let's see here. All right. So additional notes, I'm not going to go over all of this right now, but I mentioned this before, but you'll be graded on the animation and your main humanoid robot, so like models, textures, rigs. That's all individual grades. Everything else, so like room, models, textures, camera angles, all that stuff is graded as group work. So again, that's just sort of like how I've broken stuff down again. And you can see here, I've kind of gone through and like for the individual animation, this is like more or less what I'm, like how I'm gonna be grading. Same thing for like overall feel. There's like more information there. That's the basic sort of overall idea of the final. Any questions on that before we go into more specifically like robot design, what's due next week, that kind of stuff? Cool. All right, let me find the things. All right, so I'm just gonna go into the assignments for next week because they kind of flow nicely from the final, I guess. So again, team assignments, which is due on Friday. This Friday in like 3 or 4 days, is literally just like sign up for a group. Haha, I see some of you have done this. It doesn't matter which group you sign up for, again, unless you want that 3-person group. And I'm fairly certain you can also change the names of these groups. I was really bored when I made these, and I just got really weird with them. So feel free to change them if you can. But sign up for a group, and then literally just go into this submission and learn. Type in the names of the people you're working with, as well as, I think, the name of the team you've joined, and just submit. Like, that's all that's due. That is worth 1 point. So this is due on Friday. And the reason that I have that due on Friday is so that you can get your teams down and have some time to talk with whoever you're working with about the story, because you have some story pitches and like a few light sketches that are due next Tuesday. And that is pre-production, like story pitches. So these story pitches are due next Tuesday. Also, so since I didn't organize, Blackboard Learn was like being a little bit weird, and that's why I didn't organize things by week specifically. I did find this cool thing where, like, if you didn't know this existed, this calendar, if you go into month view, it'll actually tell you when everything is due. So should do this for like all of your classes, but that's pretty cool. I don't know, and handy, and I didn't know that that existed. So if you guys are ever in doubt of when anything is due, this is like the official due dates for all of my stuff and presumably anything else you have for other classes. So that could just be like a weird handy tool. But these idea pitches, this is a group project, so you'll submit this. One person from your group will kind of compile all of the stuff and submit it, and then you'll get graded for everyone. But basically, it's just coming up with 3 distinct storylines that use at least 2 humanoid robots, or 3 if you're in the 3-person group. I have this little pitch example, which I'll go over a little bit later. But for each pitch, I want basically 5 things, and they don't need to be like super crazy in-depth for most of them. So just like a brief summary of like what the story is. It can be 1 or 2 sentences, just like robot wakes up, his roommate tries to feed him burnt pancakes, and he gets mad. Like that's literally all I want for that. And then a longer version, it doesn't need to be like 10 pages long, but just something more specific. So basically, if you were if you were doing a storyboard but doing it verbally. So something like the robot wakes up, he smacks his alarm to turn it off and accidentally knocks it off the bed. He sits up and stretches, and then gets out of bed and like walks down the hallway, trudges down the stairs. So like something a little bit more visual, so that everyone, if they're reading this, they're kind of like on the same page about the actions that are happening. I would also like just some really, again, these do not need to be fancy, but just like some really brief sketches about maybe the type of robot that each of you would want to do for each particular plot. And I'm looking more, I'm not looking for like super refined designs, mostly just like general shaping of the robot, things that we can take a look at to see if it makes sense with the story, and also to give feedback on in terms of like, does it have the range of motion that will be required for your final before you go in and like start doing full-blown refined orthographics. So again, doesn't need to be super fancy, just like basic ideas of kind of like what you'd be looking to make. Apart from that, just a bullet point list of physical requirements that are required by the story. So I have some examples of that in the pitch, but that's like, I'm assuming all your robots can walk, but like if you need for some reason a jaw on your robot for a particular story, like make a note of that. And also just again, a quick bullet point list of concerns you have about each pitch. So if it's like really heavily relying on fire and you have no idea how to make fire, like that would be something that you want to put down in the concerns. So it should be like fairly quick to throw together. And again, optional, if you want to have extra robots, go for it. Watch scope creep. And I also have some suggestions for sort of easier emoting of your character when you are doing your sketches. So a single eyeball, which is actually at least 1 eyeball and a head, is required on your character. But like an additional eyebrow will get you a long way for emoting. You might also look into adding some lights to your character for like power meters, emotion, the eyeballs, like whatever. That's usually a pretty cheap way to get some extra like pizzazz in a design. And I'd recommend at least claw hands if you need your character to be picking stuff up, just so you have the option to do it if you need to. But you could do something like if you just made a dude, maybe he's like a gravedigger robot and he just has shovels for hands. You could totally make that a bit, and then if he just ever needed to pick anything up, he would just do it like really awkwardly with his awkward shovel hands. But that could actually be really cute and funny. So again, it just depends on like the sort of overall vibe that you're going for. So this is basically broken down. I'm grading each pitch separately, so 3 pitches worth 2 points each is 6 points total. You get 1 point for the idea itself, like how descriptive it was, etc. How original are the ideas, and then 1 point for the sketches, list of range of motion and concerns for each of those ideas. So again, it should be fairly straightforward, hopefully, of an assignment. In terms of what to submit, if you could just make 1 PDF with all of the information for each idea, and submit 3 PDFs. Please don't zip them. I just throw all the PDFs directly onto Learn. That's totally fine. But that should be just like how you submit stuff for this. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so I did promise you this pitch example. which I just wrote up really randomly. So again, I don't have sketches in this one, but we have this like short version, which is basically just like robot wakes up, finds pancakes, but hasn't made enough for them. And then I actually like ignored this when I did the long version, which is dumb. But you can see this one. I just go into a little bit more explicitly like what's happening. So again, like the example before from like the alarm going off, him walking down the hallway, that kind of thing. I also go into detail about like there's a cooking montage of the two robots like flipping pancakes and throwing chocolate chips into the mix, being generally spazzy, etc. And then I just sort of like, again, so like instead of saying like the robot gives him burnt pancakes and he gets mad, saying Bob, the one robot, stamps his foot in rage and stomps over to Leonard, the other robot, who looks at him inquisitively for a moment before Bob grabs his head, shoves the burnt pancakes into his mouth, takes his plate, and stalks back upstairs. Like, I feel like by reading this, it's like everyone can kind of like imagine pretty much like a similar thing of like what that would look like. So that's really just what I'm shooting for this. It's just sort of like visual cues for like how your thing would be put together. Apart from that, so this is like the sort of required range of motion based on the story. So in this case, I have the one robot waking up in the beginning, so he would need some kind of like change in eye state. If you want to do that as like lights turning on or off, give him some kind of eyelid that open and closes, like whatever. But you would need some way to convey that like this robot is now awake. In this case, you would also need hands to hold a spatula or pancakes, or you could make the one robot like literally have spatula hands, just kind of like whatever makes sense, but somehow he has to handle cooking stuff. And then Leonard would also need a mouth or food hatch or like a face furnace in which to incinerate the super burnt pancakes that get shoved into his face. So this is like the kind of stuff, like again, just specific things that are like required for a given story. And then some concern, like again, whatever concerns you have. Chopping stuff up is a pain. I've done it before and it sucks. So like that would be a concern, just like having to deal with that. Also like texturing bread is like my personal nemesis. Texturing bread is really annoying. And there's also in this lots of scenery. So I have like a bedroom and a hallway and a kitchen, and like that's just a lot of stuff that needs to get modeled. So just like whatever your concerns are, and this is just so we can maybe suggest some ideas. I can let you know if something seems like really like out of the scope of the project, or if there's like a really easy solution to like whatever you were thinking of doing. And other people can help throw in their ideas as well. But that's basically what's required for the story pitch. Any questions on that? Okay. So again, the story pitch is due next Tuesday. Your team ideas are, or your team mate names are due on Friday. The only other thing that I wanted to go over in terms of assignments, and this is not actually due next week, it's due next Friday. And I'll change that in the syllabus list. But that is the robot orthographics. And this I just mostly want to go over. There's some information specifically about requirements for the robot, like how to add more points for the robot, that kind of thing, which will help inform perhaps your stories and at least your sketches. So again, this is not due next Tuesday. I do just sort of want to touch on some of the information in it. But the sort of biggies for the robot is it must be humanoid and bipedal. And it should, so it should like stand upright, walk on two legs, don't do robot sharks. I did have people, interestingly, in both of my other classes ask me if they could rip limbs off their robot, to which my response is yes. If you're gonna do that, I would recommend ripping an arm off, purely because ripping a leg off is gonna cause a lot more like extra work for animating a walk cycle and translating your reference into an animation. So the reason, like, when I had this class, there was no requirement for the robot being humanoid. It was pretty much just like do whatever. But the reason that it's been switched now is because this class is really focusing on sort of the technical aspects of how to make reasonable looking animations that are like free of technical glitches, that kind of thing, for humans. And being able to shoot reference of you just like walking around somewhere and then translate that directly into animation without needing to worry about like this guy is missing a leg and like how does that work, is going to be significantly easier and allow you to actually focus more on the animation than like trying to figure out how the physics of like a one-legged robot would walk. Does that make sense? Hopefully? Okay. I'm just gonna take your silence as a yes, unless I hear otherwise. So other requirements is some kind of head with a form of an eyeball in it. I'll be a little bit loosey with like the head requirement if you just want to do like a big like robot with like basically like an eyeball on his chest or something like that. I'm kind of cool with that, but like it does require some kind of eyeball. Also, one element of smooth skin binding. I'll go over that and like show you examples of that when we look at Skelebot and some of the other student examples, but basically something that's not like a rigid piece of metal in the robot's body. And then this is like the one that I'll harp on probably the most in like the earliest stages of like when you're doing sketches, but your robot is required to be animated. It does need sufficient range of motion for your animations. And if for some reason your design is gonna like prohibit it from moving, that is something that you would definitely want to address before you start modeling. Also, who or what the robot is should be obvious from the design, insofar as it affects the story. So if your whole plot hinges on the idea that your robot is a ninja, and you can't tell that this robot is a ninja from the design, that could potentially make your story unclear. So that's why you'd want to sort of like address ninja robot and like make it clear from the design what that robot is. Same kind of thing if your robot's like a cop or something like that. Find ways to maybe make it look copy. I realized it was an actual word. But again, I'll go over this more later. I have some examples of like different sort of styles of robots that you might consider, and there's some good examples of that. And then also just like, feel free to use other existing robot designs as inspiration, just don't like make BB-8 and just put BB-8 in your thing. So like, yeah, I don't know. Basically don't plagiarize other designs. You can use them for inspiration and that's totally fine, but don't rip them off one for one. So that's basically just like the requirements for the robot. Again, to keep in mind as you're doing the sketches and like planning out your story. And this I'll go over again a little bit like next week in terms of what to do specifically for the orthographics. Any questions on that? All right. Let me double check my notes really quick and make sure that I've gone over everything. Excellent. Great.
I have a question regarding one of the previous homeworks you were talking about.
Okay.
The story pitch.
Yes.
Is that something we're submitting on Blackboard? 'Cause
Yes.
I do not see it.
What? Okay, give me
Suppose we do Tuesday, right?
two. Yeah.
I think it's the because the one that links to docs is the pre-production.
Yeah.
It
It's.
says work in progress animation though.
Yeah.
Okay. So so if you go, I'm considering. Oh, okay. If you go into assignments and then pre-production, the story pitches is like should be the first one that shows up.
Okay.
Is
So
it-
it's just not open because all I have is work in progress animations.
Wait, what? Hang on.
This is what my screen looks like under pre-production.
Well, that's highly questionable. Is this?
That's what I was.
I will look at that during break and then let you guys know why. Apparently, you can't see like all of the assignments. Oh wait, you can. What? Interesting.
I am on pre-production. Yeah.
That's
What?
okay. That's really weird. I'll look at the settings on my end and see if it's still not showing up. Why? Otherwise, that might be a thing that I'll need to contact IT about. If for some reason, I'm gonna say, if for some reason that is not resolved by next class, for those of you that are unable to access the Blackboard Learn to submit the assignment through Learn, what you can do is go into, you have the syllabus pages working, right? Like where you can go into the like class-specific folder and assignments thing? Okay. So you can find all of the information through there if you go into like the story and pre-production doc. And just, actually, your other teammate might have access to Learn, in which case just have them submit it. But if that's not a thing and neither of you have access, do all of the stuff like you normally would and email it to me instead of submitting it through Learn, and just let me know that like your Learn is being insane. Cool. Any questions on that? All right. Sorry for that's like really weird. Yeah. It was.
So like, due Friday, we're supposed to like have our group and stuff. Is it like, are we automatically like assigned if they just join the group? Because and then we can like email each other. Like, how do we stay connected? Like.
So yeah. So I mean, a lot of people like exchange phone numbers or whatever, just like depending on what your preference is. There is. So let me like enter student preview. So if I go into a group, I should be able to sign up for the Elegant Emu. It'll give you the name, like when you click into that group, of anybody who's already in that group, and allow you to do like file exchanging and like other stuff. It'll also give you like their email. So what I would say is, if you like don't know anyone and you don't have a group by Friday, if there's a group that's just sort of with like one person in it, I would just sort of like sign up for it, and then you can like send them an email. Or you can also like, if you still can't like find a group member, you guys are also welcome to email me, and then I can like collect a list of people who aren't in groups and just sort of like help connect you guys as well.
Can't you connect with the group?
What? Say again?
Can't you connect with people in the group using your
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like every once in a while though, like Blackboard is like kind of weird. So if you guys are having issues with either signing up for a group or like anything else, feel free to let me know, and I'm glad again to like help connect you guys or pester IT and be like, why is Blackboard not displaying most of your assignments? Which actually, let me add that to my list. Blackboard not. So I will poke IT about the Blackboard thing if it's not fixed by break. But yeah, but I mean, you should be able to go through, and I also have access, like when I'm looking at the group stuff, I can see like which groups only have one person in it, so I might send out like an email Thursday night or something like that. That's like, hey, like these groups have one person in it. If they're like open, if you need to join a group somewhere. But yeah, if for some reason there's like people without a group, or I go in on Friday and I see that like there's a bunch of one-person groups, I'll contact you guys and like let you know how to fiddle with that and like get in two-person groups.
When like on Fridays, like it's due?
I think Friday midnight is what I set it to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Cool. So I think. Yes. All right. Cool. Let's do a quick like 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. I'll go over again some previous work from the class, show you Skelebot, and show you a few different types of joints and like how to model them. But for 5 minutes, go. Be free.
I think this is what